I've always been the quiet force holding everything together, the one who manages the numbers, balances the books, and keeps the family afloat even when no one notices. My name is Winifred Nichols. At 42, I'm a financial analyst with nearly 2 decades of experience at a prestigious investment firm. Numbers have always been my refuge, my way of imposing order on the chaos of life. But in my own home, the chaos often felt just beneath the surface, bubbling under the calm facade I maintained. From the outside, my life might seem enviable. A stable marriage with Marcus, my husband, and a teenage daughter named Emily. But the truth is more complicated. I've spent years quietly supporting Marcus's ambitious business ventures, juggling the family's complex finances, and trying to keep the peace. Marcus is charming and persuasive, with the kind of entrepreneurial spirit that draws people in. But behind that charisma lurked recklessness. Recklessness I often had to clean up after. I was the one who refinanced our properties when his deals went south. I was the one who balanced the budget when his spending spiraled out of control. I managed the day-to-day money, the bills, the investments in ways that no one acknowledged. My parents trusted me with much of the family's financial details, relying on my steady hand to safeguard what they had built over a lifetime. Yet, despite all this, I felt increasingly invisible, a silent partner in a marriage and family that didn't truly see me. At family gatherings, I was the one who took notes, who quietly made sure that bills were paid and that Marcus's ventures had the resources they needed. Marcus, on the other hand, was the one receiving praise for his bold ideas and ambitious plans. I was supposed to be supportive, the rock behind his dreams, but somewhere along the way, my quiet competence became expectation, and my sacrifices went unrecognized. The tension simmered for years, subtle but undeniable. I sensed Marcus's growing impatience with me, his dismissive glances when I brought up financial concerns, and yet I clung to hope, the hope that love and loyalty would keep us united, that my unwavering support would be enough. I told myself that family meant standing together through thick and thin, that the sacrifices I made were part of the journey. Everything came to a head at my parents' funeral. The air was heavy with grief, the atmosphere thick with sorrow and unspoken words. I was surrounded by family, each person trying to hold themselves together, finding comfort in shared loss. But amidst the quiet weeping and whispered condolences, Marcus leaned toward me, his breath cold and steady against my ear. "I want a divorce," he whispered. The words shattered me. It was as if the ground beneath me had opened, swallowing every ounce of stability I thought I had. I stared at him, disbelief cracking the calm I had so carefully maintained. Around us, people hugged and wept, mourning the end of my parents' lives. And here was Marcus, cold and detached, declaring the end of our marriage in the most brutal way possible, right next to their graves. My heart collapsed inwardly, but I kept my face still, masking the chaos that swirled inside. The betrayal didn't just sting, it unraveled everything I had believed about our life together. That moment exposed cracks I had long ignored, cracks I now couldn't deny. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to collapse in tears right there on the cold earth, but I didn't. Instead, I swallowed the pain, the shock, and the disbelief, and held myself together. Because I knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning of a much darker truth. As the funeral ended and people began to leave, I stood still, feeling small, broken, but not defeated. What Marcus didn't know was that I had always kept secrets of my own, and some secrets, as I would soon discover, had the power to change everything. From the very beginning, the dynamics in my family had been painfully clear. Marcus was the star, the favored son-in-law, the golden boy with the entrepreneurial spark everyone admired. I remember those early days vividly, though part of me wishes I could forget them. My parents, especially my mother, Barbara, would beam with pride whenever Marcus spoke about his latest business idea or a promising deal. His charisma was magnetic, his confidence intoxicating. They saw in him the kind of success story they dreamed of, a man bold enough to chase big ambitions, unafraid of risk. Meanwhile, I was the steady hand in the background, the one who quietly handled the family's finances, kept the household running, and made sure bills were paid on time. I wasn't the one who drew attention. I was the one who made sure everything could continue smoothly so Marcus could chase his dreams. But no one saw that as extraordinary. It was expected, taken for granted. My contributions often went unnoticed or were brushed off as ordinary. At family dinners, the conversation would inevitably circle back to Marcus's ventures, his plans, his challenges, his triumphs. My parents would listen attentively, nodding, asking him questions with genuine enthusiasm. Occasionally, I'd chime in with practical concerns, like how his spending affected the family budget or the risks we were incurring. But those concerns were met with polite smiles and quick changes of subject. It was as if my voice carried less weight, as if my role was only to support, not to lead or influence. Behind closed doors, I juggled more than most realized. When Marcus's businesses hit rough patches, I was the one who found ways to keep us afloat. I restructured loans, refinanced properties, negotiated with banks, all without fanfare or recognition. I postponed my own career goals, declining promotions or new opportunities to focus on stabilizing our finances and caring for my aging parents. The sacrifices were numerous and deeply personal, yet I accepted them silently, rationalizing that this was what it meant to be part of a family. The imbalance was glaring, but I convinced myself it was just the way things were supposed to be. I told myself that Marcus's risks were necessary, that his vision would eventually pay off, and that my steady support was the quiet engine behind it all. I clung to the hope that love and loyalty would be enough, that eventually my efforts would be seen and appreciated. But the seeds of resentment had already been planted. I grew tired of being invisible in my own family, invisible in my marriage. I watched as my parents lavished praise on Marcus's daring, while my own sacrifices faded into the background. Family discussions about money and inheritance almost always excluded me, as if I were a guest rather than a daughter and wife with a stake in what was being decided. My parents trusted Marcus to take the lead, perhaps blinded by his charm. I was left on the sidelines, managing the details but never the direction. It was a subtle but persistent hurt, being sidelined in the very family I had dedicated myself to. I longed for acknowledgement, for a genuine partnership where my voice mattered. Instead, I felt smaller and smaller, my contributions dismissed as ordinary, while Marcus's reckless ambitions were celebrated. Looking back now, I realize how early this dynamic set the stage for everything that followed. The favoritism wasn't just about admiration, it was about control and expectation. Marcus was allowed to dream and fail loudly. I was expected to clean up the mess quietly. The family's blind spot became my burden. This imbalance created a silent tension that no one wanted to confront. I buried my frustration beneath layers of duty and love, hoping that someday the scales would tip, that I'd finally stand as an equal partner, respected and valued. But the truth was harsher. The family's loyalty was firmly planted on Marcus's side, and I was left to hold the pieces together alone, watching as my own identity slowly eroded in the shadows of his ambition. And that quiet exclusion, that invisible weight, was a wound that would only deepen, one that I hadn't yet fully understood, but that was already shaping the cracks beneath the surface of our family's facade. Behind the scenes of our family's story was a chapter few ever saw, one where I was the silent architect holding everything together while Marcus basked in the spotlight. Every time one of his ventures stumbled, I was there, working tirelessly to patch the cracks he left behind. It wasn't glamorous work. There were no cheers or accolades, just long nights spent poring over loan agreements, balancing sheets, and recalculating budgets. I became the safety net, the quiet rescuer cloaked in patience and grit. I vividly remember the countless hours spent negotiating with banks to refinance our family properties. When Marcus's latest startup ran into unexpected trouble, threatening to drain our savings, I'd step in. I'd sift through mortgage paperwork, speak with lenders, and craft proposals that would buy us time he often wasted chasing the next big idea. There was a particular evening etched in my memory, just months before the funeral, when I sat alone at our kitchen table, the dim light flickering above me, surrounded by stacks of documents, My hands trembled slightly from exhaustion and anxiety, but I refused to give in. The stakes were too high, not just for our finances, but for Emily's future, for the legacy my parents had worked so hard to build. Covering Marcus's mounting debts wasn't just about numbers. It was about protecting our family's stability. I quietly paid off credit cards, absorbed unexpected bills, and redirected funds from my own modest salary to patch holes in our budget. Marcus rarely noticed these efforts, or if he did, he dismissed them as routine. I never complained because I believed in the promise of our shared dreams. I told myself that sacrifices were part of marriage, that love meant weathering storms together, even if it meant standing alone in the rain sometimes. Caring for my aging parents added another layer of responsibility I bore silently. While Marcus was often out chasing clients or networking over dinners, I was the one making sure my parents had their medications, their bills were paid, and their home was secure. Sometimes I felt like I was living in two worlds: the business battles during the day, and the tender, exhausting caregiving at night. It was exhausting, but no one asked for help, and I never thought to offer it. This was what family meant, to me at least. I even declined a major promotion at work, an opportunity that could have elevated my career and brought financial independence, because I didn't want to lose focus on stabilizing our family's fragile foundation. The decision stung deeply, but I convinced myself it was temporary. Marcus's ventures needed support, and Emily needed her mother present. I was willing to put my own ambitions on hold to keep everything afloat. Our daughter Emily was a quiet observer of this unspoken struggle. I saw the way her eyes sometimes lingered on Marcus with a mix of admiration and worry, and how she noticed my tired smiles and late nights. She never voiced it, but I knew she felt the tension slicing through our home. Still, I held on to hope, fragile but persistent, that the love and loyalty I invested would somehow be enough to hold us together, that eventually, my steady presence would be recognized, and my sacrifices would be valued. Yet, beneath the surface, I was drowning in invisibility. The more I gave, the less I was seen. My contributions, though foundational, became mere background noise to Marcus's loud ambitions and my parents' adoration of him. At family dinners, his successes were toasted, his ideas celebrated, while my worries and practical insights were often brushed aside or silenced. I learned to smile politely, to nod in agreement, to keep my voice calm and measured, even when inside, I was screaming for acknowledgement. This quiet erasure was the hardest burden of all. I was the family's financial backbone, the one keeping the household running and the future secure. Yet I was treated like a supporting character in my own life story. The weight of that invisibility pressed on me constantly, but I carried it without complaint. I told myself that love meant sacrifice, that loyalty meant putting others first, and that someday, my role would be honored. Looking back now, I see how those years of silent labor and unseen strength shaped me, how they built a reservoir of resilience I didn't even know I had. But at the time, I was just a woman trying to hold her family together, hoping that my quiet competence would be enough to secure the life we dreamed of. Little did I know, the foundation I'd worked so hard to maintain was already beginning to crack beneath my feet. Weeks before the funeral, we gathered at my aunt's house for a family reunion, an event that should have been lighthearted, a chance to connect and share stories. But beneath the forced smiles and small talk, I could feel the undercurrent of tension building, like a storm preparing to break. The house buzzed with chatter about Marcus's latest business deal, the one he was so sure would finally cement his reputation. The room was filled with relatives I hadn't seen in years, many of them eager to hear about his success, and I, as usual, felt like an outsider in my own family's circle. As Marcus stood at the center of the living room, regaling the crowd with grand plans and optimistic forecasts, I couldn't help but notice the way his eyes sparkled with confidence, a confidence I had learned to question. I sat quietly at the edge of the group, clutching a folder filled with spreadsheets and financial reports I had prepared. I had hoped to share some cautionary advice, to temper his enthusiasm with realism, but I knew better than to interrupt the narrative everyone wanted to hear. When the moment finally came, I tried to speak up gently. "Marcus, I've been reviewing the numbers on this deal, and there are some potential risks with the cash flow projections. We might want to consider a contingency plan in case the market shifts unexpectedly." My voice was calm, measured, the same tone I used at work when presenting analyses to skeptical clients. But Marcus brushed me off in an instant. "Winnie, you're always so overly cautious," he said, flashing a charming smile that drew laughter from the group. "Sometimes you have to take risks to get ahead. This deal is going to change everything. Trust me." His words dripped with a confidence that masked the recklessness I knew too well. The relatives chuckled, and a few nodded in agreement, clearly impressed by his bravado. One cousin even clapped him on the back, saying, "That's the spirit, Marcus. Playing it safe never made anyone rich." The atmosphere shifted, the room suddenly alive with admiration for my husband's boldness and a subtle dismissal of my concerns. I forced a polite smile, but inside, a storm was raging. I felt small, dismissed, like my voice was just background noise to the grand performance Marcus was putting on. The humiliation cut deep, not because of the words themselves, but because of the way they revealed the truth about how little I was truly valued. Here I was, the one who managed the family's finances, who had kept us afloat through more than one crisis, reduced to a joke, a worrier, who didn't understand the thrill of risk. As the conversation moved on, I sat back down, clutching my folder a little tighter. I could feel the sting of the room's judgment, and it was a reminder of how invisible I had become. Marcus's charm was a shield, deflecting any real scrutiny while I carried the weight of consequences no one else wanted to see. I swallowed the lump in my throat and told myself to be patient, to keep quiet. After all, this was how it had always been. My role was to support, to steady the ship, while Marcus sailed ahead, recklessly, fearlessly. Later that evening, the memory of that moment haunted me. I wondered how many times I'd ignored my own instincts, how many risks I'd quietly mitigated so that Marcus could shine. And yet, no matter how much I gave, no matter how much I sacrificed, my warnings were dismissed and my worth diminished. I felt a growing distance, not just from Marcus, but from the family who cheered him on and ignored me. That night, lying awake in our bedroom, I stared at the ceiling and asked myself when my quiet support would ever be enough. I thought about Emily, about the example we were setting for her. Should she learn that the woman behind the scenes was less important than the man in the spotlight? The weight of invisibility pressed down on me, heavier than any financial burden. And yet, despite the humiliation and the pain, I held on to a fragile hope that someday my steadiness would be recognized, that love and loyalty would be enough to bridge the growing gap. But deep inside, a whisper of doubt had begun to grow. Maybe, just maybe, the foundations I had relied on were not as solid as I'd believed, and that realization scared me more than anything. The funeral reception was held in the modest hall adjoining the cemetery, its walls lined with faded photographs of my parents' milestones, wedding anniversary parties, family vacations, the kind of moments I had always helped organize but never quite felt part of. The air was thick with the scent of wilted lilies and damp earth, mingling with whispered condolences and the soft murmur of grief-stricken relatives. Everyone's faces reflected sorrow, some cracked with exhaustion, others rigid with forced composure. I stood near the refreshment table, my hands trembling slightly as I tried to steady my breath, still reeling from the unbearable weight of loss. Marcus was across the room, his posture stiff but confident as he mingled with cousins and acquaintances. His usual charm seemed subdued, almost calculated, as if he were carefully measuring how to present himself amidst this somber crowd. My heart ached at the thought that, while I was drowning in grief and memories of my parents, Marcus was already shifting focus, calculating his next move. I watched as he leaned in close to a cousin, a man notorious for his gossip and penchant for exaggeration, and I noticed the way his lips formed words too low for anyone else to hear. Curiosity, or maybe dread, propelled me closer. I kept my distance, blending into the crowd, pretending to examine the table's modest spread, but I caught fragments of their hushed conversation, words that caused my blood to run cold. "I've already taken steps," Marcus was saying, voice low and urgent. "I'm moving assets, hiding what I can. By the time Winnie realizes, it'll be too late. This inheritance won't be hers." Not anymore. My breath caught in my throat. The man I had trusted with my life was plotting against me. Right here, in the shadow of my parents' graves, my mind reeled, trying to process the cruelty of his plan. And then came the cold whisper, just for me, though no one else heard it. I want a divorce. That whispered declaration, uttered so close to my ear moments before, now gnawed at me like a jagged shard. The same breath that should have been a vow of fidelity was now a blade severing every promise we had ever made. Around us, mourners wept and comforted each other, the weight of shared sorrow palpable. Yet Marcus's words sliced through the solemnity, like a betrayal in the most sacred of places. I felt the world tilt beneath my feet, my vision blurred, and a lump formed in my throat that refused to be swallowed. The air became heavy and suffocating, as if grief gave way to something far darker, betrayal. I wanted to scream, to confront him in front of everyone, but the image of my mother's gentle face and my father's proud gaze held me back. I couldn't let my pain become spectacle amid the sacredness of this moment. As I stood frozen, trying to gather my shattered composure, Marcus's conversation with the cousin resumed. I caught more details, mentions of secret bank accounts, ownership transfers, and legal loopholes designed to cut me out of everything. He spoke with the arrogance of a man who believed he was untouchable, who thought he had already won the game before it had even begun. Suddenly, I noticed the sharp glance from my sister-in-law across the room. Her eyes widened as she overheard the revelation too. The shock on her face mirrored the turmoil inside me, confirming that Marcus's scheme was no longer a secret confined to whispered threats. It was out in the open, exposed to family members who had always looked up to him. The funeral's weight shifted from mourning my parents to confronting the unraveling of my own life. The sacred gathering, meant to honor the past, had become the stage for a devastating fracture in my marriage and future security. The betrayal wasn't just a private wound. It was a public spectacle, a silent declaration that everything I had believed in was crumbling. I forced myself to breathe steadily, to mask the storm raging inside. Tears threatened to spill, but I blinked them back, focusing instead on the cold, hard truth. Marcus didn't just want to end our marriage. He wanted to erase my presence, my role, my rightful claim to the legacy my parents had entrusted to me. The room around me seemed to blur, voices fading into a dull hum. Grief, shock, and betrayal collided within my chest, each emotion pulling me apart and knitting me back together in a cycle of disbelief. The moment was a crucible, burning away the illusions I had held onto for so long. Yet beneath the pain, a quiet ember of resolve began to glow, a fragile, flickering promise that I wouldn't let this betrayal define me. There was a secret I carried, one no one suspected, a hidden key left by my mother in the form of an antique locket and a forgotten clause in the family will. I clung to that knowledge like a lifeline. As the reception began to wind down and mourners drifted away, I stood rooted in place, small, broken, but not defeated. The cracks in my life had been exposed, but the fight for what was mine, and for my daughter's future, had only just begun. Marcus may have thought he had the upper hand, but he had underestimated the quiet strength I was about to unleash. The moment Marcus whispered those cold words, "I want a divorce," beside the graves of my parents, it felt like the ground beneath me had crumbled into nothingness. But after the initial shock and the numbing wave of grief, something inside me began to shift. Alone in the silence of my bedroom that night, the weight of what had happened settled deep into my bones. Tears came at first, bitter and heavy, dripping down my cheeks as I sat on the edge of the bed. But grief quickly blurred into something sharper, fiercer, anger. A hard, burning anger that had been smoldering quietly for years, now ignited into a fierce blaze. I revisited every memory, every sacrifice I had made, every silent battle I had fought to keep our family afloat while Marcus chased his reckless dreams. I saw the late nights spent poring over bank statements, the afternoons negotiating with lenders, the moments when I had swallowed my frustration to pay off credit cards Marcus never mentioned. All those times I held my tongue when I knew his decisions were endangering us, hoping that love would be the glue to hold us together. And now, here he was, ready to rip everything apart, ready to erase me from the future I thought we were building. I thought about the countless times I had stepped in to save his ventures without fanfare, quietly patching holes in his reckless financial empire. The smiles I forced at family dinners, where no one acknowledged the blood, sweat, and tears behind my calm exterior. The way my parents had trusted me to protect the family legacy, even as Marcus schemed to cut me out. It was as if I had been invisible, a ghost haunting my own life. And yet, beneath the hurt, a fierce clarity emerged. The facade Marcus had built, the charming, confident businessman, was just that, a facade. Behind it was a man who cared more about control and greed than about the woman who had stood by him through every crisis. The betrayal was not a momentary lapse. It was a pattern, a calculated plan to claim everything for himself. As I sat in the quiet darkness, my mother's voice echoed softly in my mind, a whisper from the past. Protect what's truly yours, Winnie. Sometimes, the fiercest battles are fought quietly. It was advice I had heard but never fully understood until now. The fog of denial lifted. I no longer owed Marcus anything. Not my loyalty, not my love, not my future. I thought about Emily, our daughter, the innocent bystander caught in the crossfire of their parents' crumbling world. I knew I had to become stronger, not just for myself, but for her. I could not allow Marcus's betrayal to define the family she grew up in, or the woman I was. The anger that had burned so fiercely began to settle into something colder, more methodical. This was no longer about heartbreak. It was about survival and justice. There was power in that realization, a quiet, simmering power that steadied my hands and sharpened my mind. I would not unravel or break down as Marcus intended. Instead, I would fight in the way I knew best, with precision, patience, and relentless determination. The secret my mother had left behind, the locket and the hidden clause in the will, were not just relics of the past, they were my weapons. And so, as the night deepened and the rest of the world slept, I began to plot a path forward, a path that would reclaim what was rightfully mine, expose Marcus's lies, and protect my daughter's future. The woman who had been quiet for so long was beginning to emerge, not as a victim, but as a force to be reckoned with. The pain was still raw, the betrayal still fresh, but beneath it all, a new resolve took root. This was only the beginning of a reckoning Marcus never saw coming. That night, after the funeral's heavy weight had lifted and the house grew still, I sat alone in the dim light of my childhood bedroom, the one that had remained untouched since my parents passed. The air was thick with the scent of old books and the faint trace of my mother's favorite lavender perfume. I opened the worn leather box Mom had left me, a box I hadn't dared to explore fully until now. Inside lay the antique locket, a delicate gold piece etched with floral patterns, worn smooth from years of handling. The locket was more than just a keepsake. It was a symbol, a link to a secret I was only beginning to understand. I remembered Mom's quiet words from years ago, a whispered caution, "Protect what's truly yours, Winnie." At the time, I thought she meant something sentimental. Now, those words pulsed with urgency. I unfolded the thick, yellowed envelope beneath the locket. It was the last will and testament of my mother, Barbara Nichols. But hidden within the legal jargon was a clause I had never noticed before, a secret provision granting me control over a significant portion of the family estate, including assets Marcus thought were beyond my reach. I sat down at the heavy oak desk and spread out the papers. Property deeds, statements, trust agreements. The more I read, the more I realized how carefully my mother had protected the family's wealth, anticipating the kind of betrayal I now faced. Marcus, in his arrogance, had believed those assets were his to command, but the truth, tucked away in legal fine print, was that they belonged to me, and, by extension, to Emily. My heart quickened as I cataloged the details. The clause stipulated that I had full authority to manage certain properties and investments independently from my husband. There were trusts set up for Emily's education and well-being, safeguarded against any unilateral decisions. It was a masterstroke of foresight on Mom's part, one she had never revealed openly but entrusted to me in silence. This hidden leverage was the lifeline I needed. I reached out quietly to Helen, our longtime family attorney, a stern but compassionate woman who had handled my parents' affairs for decades. Over the phone, I detailed what I had found and asked for her guidance. Helen's voice was steady but tinged with concern. "Winifred, this clause changes everything. It gives you a strong legal footing. We can use it to protect your interests and Emily's future against Marcus's reckless moves. But we need to proceed carefully. He won't back down easily." Her words resonated with my growing resolve. I knew this wouldn't be a quick battle. Marcus's charm masked a stubborn will and dangerous pride. But now, armed with proof and legal authority, I had the means to push back. I began compiling financial records, bank statements, loan documents, ledgers, painstakingly gathering evidence of my contributions and his mismanagement. The debts he had hidden, the accounts he had drained without disclosure, all of it began to take shape as a portrait of recklessness and deceit. Every night I reviewed these documents with cold precision, balancing the emotional turmoil with professional detachment. I created spreadsheets highlighting discrepancies and red flags, mapping the flow of funds Marcus had tried to disguise. The family home, investments in rental properties, stocks in the firm where I worked, all these were pieces in a complex puzzle I was determined to solve. I knew that exposing the truth would not only reclaim what was mine, but also protect Emily from a future marred by financial uncertainty. Throughout this process, I wore a calm mask, answering Marcus's casual questions with neutral replies, never revealing the storm gathering beneath my measured exterior. If he sensed my shift in tone or detected the tightening of his control, he never admitted it. I watched him carefully, noting the flickers of frustration when his usual tactics, charm, intimidation, persuasion, failed to sway me. The secret clause in the will was my best weapon, a safeguard designed by my mother's intuition and love. It was a quiet rebellion against the very dynamics that had silenced me for so long. I felt a deep connection to her wisdom, a sense that she had prepared me for this moment, even if she never said so outright. As days turned to weeks, my plan took shape. Not a reckless retaliation, but a calculated strategy. I would use the law, the cold facts, and the unshakable truth of my mother's legacy to dismantle Marcus's false dominion. I wasn't just fighting for money or property. I was fighting to reclaim my dignity, to assert my worth, and to secure a future where Emily could thrive without fear of betrayal. This was no longer about quiet endurance or silent sacrifice. It was about standing tall, about harnessing the power hidden in the shadows, and about proving that respect and loyalty must be earned, not assumed by those who shout the loudest. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with tension and risk, but I was ready to walk it, one deliberate step at a time. From that night forward, my actions shifted from silent suffering to quiet, deliberate assertion. The first step was severing Marcus's unfettered access to our joint accounts. It was a small but seismic move, one I executed methodically, under the guise of routine financial housekeeping. Late into the night, I logged into our online bank portal, carefully redirecting funds to new accounts I had established in Emily's name. These accounts were structured as protected trusts, legally insulated from Marcus's reach. I had discussed this with Helen, our family attorney, who helped me set up the trust to ensure Emily's future remained secure no matter what Marcus attempted. At first, Marcus brushed off my actions as overprotectiveness or stress from the funeral and family upheaval. When he asked why I was moving money around, I offered vague explanations about wanting to simplify our finances and prepare for upcoming tax filings. He nodded, distracted, never suspecting the quiet fortress I was building around our daughter's inheritance. It was a delicate balance, doing just enough to protect without raising alarms. Simultaneously, I stopped co-signing on any new business loans Marcus sought. This was a critical turning point. Previously, I had always been a safety net, putting my name on agreements to secure better terms or stave off creditors. But now, I refused outright. When Marcus presented a new loan application, filled with his usual grand promises about the next big venture, I shook my head firmly. "You're on your own with this one," I said quietly, watching the surprise flicker across his face. "I can't risk our family's finances any further." His charm faltered. For a moment, The confident entrepreneur vanished, replaced by a man stripped of his financial safety net. He tried persuasion, guilt, even anger, but I held firm. This wasn't about emotions anymore. It was about boundaries and survival. I also began withdrawing emotional support in subtle ways. I stopped answering his calls immediately, avoided engaging in his business dreams with the same enthusiasm as before, and kept my responses measured, detached. It was a silent message. I was no longer the woman who would prop up his reckless ambitions at the cost of our family's security. To tighten control further, I changed passwords on all shared financial platforms, bank accounts, investment portals, tax filing sites. I documented every change meticulously, recording dates and details in a secure ledger I kept locked away. Helen advised that maintaining a paper trail would be essential if things escalated. It was painstaking work, but every entry was a brick in the wall I was quietly erecting around my daughter's future. I also contacted Helen to begin preparing for the inevitable divorce proceedings. Our conversations were clinical and focused, a contrast to the emotional upheaval I felt inside. Helen outlined the legal frameworks, the evidence needed, and the strategies to protect my interests. We discussed the clause in my mother's will and the trusts, which gave me significant leverage. Helen cautioned that Marcus would resist fiercely, but she believed our position was strong. Her confidence bolstered my resolve. Meanwhile, Marcus seemed oblivious to the full extent of my maneuvers. He noticed my growing detachment and the sudden financial roadblocks, but dismissed them as stress-induced irritability or grief-related withdrawal. At family gatherings, he still smiled and made jokes, trying to maintain his image, but I could see the cracks, frustrations simmering beneath his charismatic facade. Each time he pressed for explanations, I answered calmly, but firmly, never revealing the depths of my preparations. I learned to control my tone, keeping my voice steady even when my heart pounded with a mix of fear and fierce determination. This was a war waged in silence, where the smallest details mattered. The timing of a password change, the discreet transfer of funds, the refusal to back another risky loan. I was transforming from the supportive wife into a strategic guardian of the legacy my parents entrusted to me. Every move was calculated, measured to protect Emily's future, and to strip Marcus of the control he had arrogantly assumed. The betrayal had ignited a fire that I tended carefully, letting it smolder beneath a composed exterior. I was no longer invisible. I was a force preparing to reclaim what was mine. As days turned into weeks after the funeral, the atmosphere in our home shifted palpably. The ease of past years was replaced by a tense stillness. Marcus's calls to me became more frequent, tinged with frustration and desperation. At times, he attempted to charm his way back, weaving promises of change and reconciliation. But I held firm, my responses brief and unwavering. The woman who once welcomed his dreams with open arms was now a guardian of boundaries, her trust broken, but her resolve unshaken. I knew this was just the beginning. The web I was weaving had to be strong enough to withstand his assaults, legal, emotional, and social. But with every transfer, every password reset, and every firm refusal, I was tightening the noose around the reckless empire Marcus had built on my silent labor. The stakes were high, but so was my determination. For Emily, for myself, I was ready to fight in the quietest, most effective way I knew. The day of the family meeting arrived like a storm quietly gathering force. We gathered in the same room where so many family milestones had been celebrated. Birthdays, anniversaries, even my parents' 40th wedding anniversary. Now it felt heavy with unspoken tensions and the weight of recent loss. The air was thick, the light dim through the lace curtains, casting long shadows across the polished wooden table where we all sat. Marcus, me, Emily, and the rest of the family. The silence before I spoke was deafening, but I held my ground. It was time to reveal what had been simmering beneath the surface for months. I began deliberately, my voice calm but resolute. "There's something everyone needs to understand clearly," I said, meeting Marcus's gaze directly for the first time in a long while. "I have legal control over a significant part of my parents' estate, assets that Marcus has no right to touch or hide. This isn't up for debate." My fingers unconsciously played with the antique locket my mother had entrusted to me, a silent emblem of the legacy I was now charged to protect. Marcus's confident smirk faltered as murmurs rose around the room. I continued, unfurling the documents I had painstakingly compiled: trust agreements, property deeds, the secret clause in my mother's will. Each paper laid bare the truth of what had been concealed. These documents proved that the assets Mom and Dad carefully protected belonged to Emily and me, not Marcus. And despite his claims, Marcus has been mismanaging funds, hiding debts, and putting the family's financial future at risk. I watched as his face tightened, the mask of self-assuredness slipping. Some family members exchanged uncomfortable glances, their earlier admiration for Marcus now shadowed by doubt. I pulled out the spreadsheets I'd created, displaying the evidence of Marcus's reckless spending and the debts he had tried to keep secret. The numbers were undeniable. Hidden loans, unpaid balances, funds diverted without my knowledge. Marcus, you've repeatedly ignored warnings and gambled with money that wasn't solely yours to risk, I stated. My voice was steady, but beneath it burned a fierce determination. I'm here to set boundaries, not just for myself, but for Emily and the legacy our parents trusted me to protect. The room grew tense, the weight of my words sinking in. Marcus opened his mouth, probably to protest, but I cut him off gently yet firmly. No more empty promises or attempts to control the narrative. From this moment on, decisions about the estate and family assets will include Emily's and my interests exclusively, and no longer at your whim. The silence that followed was charged and suffocating. I could feel the shift. No longer was I the quiet wife in the background. I had stepped into the light as the gatekeeper of our family's future. Marcus's usual bravado was replaced by a flicker of panic, and I saw him glance around, seeking support from relatives who now looked unsure. Emily sat beside me, her eyes wide but proud, silently lending me strength. For years I had carried this burden alone, but now the family bore witness to the truth. I could almost hear the unspoken acknowledgement that Marcus's reign, built on charm and reckless ambition, was crumbling. As the meeting drew toward its inevitable conclusion, I laid down one final condition. I will not consider any reconciliation or partnership unless there is respect, transparency, and accountability. Until then, I will protect what is mine and ensure Emily's future is secure. Marcus's voice broke through the quiet, strained and defensive. Winnie, you're overstepping. This isn't how family works. But his words lacked force now, hollow against the evidence and my unwavering stance. I met his gaze, unflinching. Family isn't about control or entitlement. It's about respect and responsibility, and that's what I intend to enforce. The meeting ended with no clear resolution, but the message was clear. The era of silence and invisibility was over. I had dismantled Marcus's illusions and laid bare the reality, one I would continue to guard fiercely, no matter the cost. The family's future was no longer his to dictate, and the legacy my mother had entrusted to me was finally being honored. But I knew this was only the beginning. Marcus wouldn't surrender quietly. The battle lines were drawn, and the real fight for justice and respect was just unfolding. Marcus's world began to unravel with alarming speed. The very accounts he once controlled with ease were now frozen, locked behind walls I had built layer by layer. Legal barriers, trust protections, and carefully documented paperwork. I watched quietly as the man who had so arrogantly whispered, "I want a divorce," found himself scrambling in desperation, his confident facade cracking under the weight of mounting debts he could no longer dodge. One afternoon, I received a call from a number I recognized instantly. It was Marcus. The tone in his voice was different now. Gone was the usual charm and bravado. Instead, there was something raw, almost pleading. "Winnie, please, we need to talk," he said, voice tense. "This isn't how I wanted things to go. Think about the years we've shared. The memories, Emily. Don't let this end like this." I sat still, the phone pressed lightly against my ear, heart pounding, but resolve steady. His words were a calculated attempt to pull me back into the web of familiarity, to guilt me into surrendering what I had fought so hard to protect. but I was no longer the woman who would be swayed by empty promises or sentimental appeals. "Marcus," I replied, voice cool and measured, "I'm protecting what's ours, the future Emily deserves. That means setting clear boundaries." His sigh was heavy, almost a confession. "I know I've made mistakes, but we can fix this. Remember those nights when you stayed up managing the bills while I chased dreams? Remember the family dinners, the plans we made? We can still be a family." The memories he invoked were meant to chip away at my armor, but beneath them, I detected the desperation, the fear of losing control. Yet, beneath the surface of his pleas, a more insidious effort was unfolding. Marcus began rallying allies within the family, calling on relatives who had once admired his ambition to intervene on his behalf. I heard whispers at family gatherings, carefully framed versions of his story, casting me as cold, unyielding, someone who was destroying the family and shattering what remained. It was a tactic familiar to me, manipulating perception to regain sympathy. But this time, the house of cards was crumbling. News of his financial troubles began to leak. Rumors swirled quietly at first, delayed payments, foreclosure notices, creditors knocking on doors. Marcus's reputation, once polished and untouchable, started to tarnish under the weight of truth. At social events, I noticed the change. Former friends offered polite, wary smiles, their eyes flickering with barely concealed judgment. The charismatic entrepreneur was becoming a cautionary tale. Through it all, I remained unmoved, steadfast in my silence and firm in my actions. I refused to engage in the drama Marcus tried to provoke. When he begged for mercy or threatened to expose personal details, I responded with quiet strength, reinforcing the boundaries I had set. Our conversations grew terse, transactional, no longer husband and wife, but two adversaries navigating the unfolding battle. "I'm not the enemy," Marcus insisted during one tense exchange, voice edged with frustration. "You're tearing this family apart. And you're the one who started this by betraying my trust," I answered firmly. "I owe you nothing, not after what you tried to do." My words hung heavily in the air, cutting through years of silence and denial. Emily, caught in the crossfire, watched these changes with wide, perceptive eyes. She sensed the fracture, the tension thickening our home's atmosphere. Yet, instead of fear or confusion, her gaze held something unexpected, a quiet admiration for the strength I was showing. She understood that her mother was fighting not just for herself, but for their future. I could feel her pride in me, a silent but profound support that bolstered my resolve. The family's response was fractured. Some relatives began to question Marcus's narrative, doubting the polished image he had maintained for so long. Others, still loyal to the past, blamed me for destroying the family, accusing me of being unforgiving or too harsh. Their words stung, but I knew that healing and justice were rarely comfortable or neat. The toxic dynamics that had festered for years were now spilling into the open, forcing everyone to confront uncomfortable truths. In the quiet moments between confrontations, I reflected on this shift. Marcus's panic and pleas were signs of his unraveling, but they also underscored the gravity of what I had set in motion. I wasn't merely defending assets or legal rights. I was dismantling a facade, exposing recklessness and entitlement that had been cloaked in charm and confidence. The stakes were higher than I had imagined. Marcus's empire was teetering, and with each passing day, the noose around his control grew tighter. I prepared for every challenge he might throw my way. Legal battles, emotional manipulation, family pressure, with a calm rooted in preparation and determination. The quiet strength I had cultivated over years of sacrifice was now a shield and a weapon. But even as Marcus's desperation mounted, I sensed in him a growing panic masked by bravado, a man coming to realize that the safety net he had always counted on was gone. Frozen accounts, mounting debts, and the withdrawal of support left him exposed in a way he had never experienced. His pleas for mercy and attempts to guilt me were the last echoes of a relationship that had long since fractured beyond repair. This was no longer about saving a marriage or maintaining appearances. It was a reckoning, a moment when the consequences of choices made in greed, arrogance, and betrayal could no longer be avoided. and I was ready to see it through, no matter how tumultuous the path ahead would be. The battle was far from over. Marcus's scramble revealed his vulnerability, but it also signaled that he would fight fiercely to reclaim what he had lost. And I knew that to protect what was truly mine, and Emily's, I would have to remain vigilant, unyielding, and resolute as the next phase of this struggle unfolded. Marcus's world was unraveling faster than I ever expected. The foreclosure notices began arriving like dark clouds, each one a tangible sign that the empire he had so confidently built was collapsing. The properties he once paraded as symbols of success were now under threat, their value sinking as unpaid loans piled up, and creditors knocked louder, demanding answers he couldn't provide. The financial fortress I had quietly constructed to protect Emily's future was exposing the cracks in his reckless ventures, and there was no going back. I watched from a distance, not out of cruelty, but with a measured calm that hid the storm inside me. The man who had so arrogantly whispered, "I want a divorce," beside the graves of my parents, was now scrambling to stay afloat. His usual charm, the weapon that had disarmed family and friends alike, was losing its power. At first, I heard him reach out through thinly veiled pleas on the phone, his voice laced with desperation rather than confidence. "Winnie, please, let's talk. I'm trying to fix this," he said one afternoon. "I never meant for it to come to this. We can work it out. For Emily, for us." But I knew better. His promises were as fragile as the business deals that had brought us to this point. The years of disregard, the lies about hidden assets, the betrayal whispered so coldly in the shadow of loss. None of it would be erased by empty words now. The stress of it all began to take a visible toll on him. The confident stride was replaced by hurried steps and restless pacing. His face, once smooth and assured, showed the first signs of strain, dark circles beneath his eyes, a pallor that no amount of cologne could mask. Friends and business associates started to drift away, wary of the man whose empire was crumbling. Invitations dwindled. Once warm greetings turned into polite but distant nods. It was as if the social circles that once orbited around his charisma were now pulling back, sensing that the man they admired was falling apart. I heard whispers at family gatherings, half-hearted defenses of Marcus from those still loyal, but also the cautious voices of relatives who had begun to see through the veneer. Some accused me of breaking the family, casting me as the cold outsider, the destroyer of harmony. The words stung, but I understood the pain of seeing a family's fragile illusion shattered. I bore the brunt of their judgment because I was the one standing firm, demanding accountability where there had been none. Marcus didn't give up easily. When he couldn't charm, he tried intimidation and manipulation. A few times he hinted at exposing private details, trying to unsettle me, but I was prepared. Years of meticulous record-keeping and legal counsel meant I had a shield of facts and evidence that no threat could pierce. Our exchanges became terse, transactional, no longer husband and wife, but adversaries locked in a battle that extended beyond emotions. This was about survival and justice. During a particularly tense phone call, he pleaded, "Winnie, we can fix this. Don't make it worse. Think about Emily." His voice broke, the veneer of bravado slipping for a moment, but I responded firmly, "I'm doing what's best for Emily. That means protecting her future from recklessness and betrayal." My resolve echoed in the quiet on the other end. Emily was watching everything. Her eyes reflected a maturity beyond her years, a quiet understanding of the fracture in our family. She never said much, but her support was a silent pillar beneath my strength. I saw how she held her head a little higher, how small moments of pride flickered in her gaze when I stood my ground. The family's response fractured along old fault lines. Some relatives began questioning Marcus's version of events, sensing the cracks in his story. Others, still clinging to past loyalties, blamed me for the unraveling, accusing me of coldness or harshness. I knew that healing from years of toxic dynamics would be messy and painful, and that my role as the catalyst for change made me an easy target. But I accepted it, focusing on what mattered most, the truth and Emily's future. Behind this turmoil, I reflected on the significance of what I had set in motion. Marcus's desperation and panic were signs of his unraveling, but they also underscored the necessity of my actions. I wasn't just defending assets. I was dismantling a dangerous illusion built on entitlement and deceit. Every frozen account, every foreclosure notice was a step toward justice for the family I was fighting to protect. Yet, I knew this was far from over. Marcus's desperation would make him unpredictable and fierce. I had to remain vigilant, prepared for legal battles, emotional manipulation, and family pressure. But beneath it all, I felt a quiet certainty. The quiet woman who had long been invisible was now an unyielding force. I was no longer just defending what was mine. I was redefining the future of our family. The days stretched on, each bringing new challenges but also new affirmations of my strength. Marcus's empire was crumbling, his lifestyle forced to shrink with it. The man who once seemed invincible was exposed, vulnerable, and isolated. And through it all, I stood firm, ready to protect what my parents had entrusted to me and to build a life anchored in dignity, respect, and clear boundaries. The air in the room was thick with unspoken tension as I finally laid down the terms that would mark a new chapter in this fractured family saga. I looked Marcus straight in the eyes, steady and unwavering, and said, "From now on, any contact between us must be grounded in respect, honesty, and a shared commitment to Emily's well-being. Without those, there will be no communication." The weight of my words settled over us like a silent decree, clear, firm, and non-negotiable. It wasn't easy to reach this point, but years of silent endurance had culminated in a resolute boundary I could no longer cross. I wasn't just protecting myself anymore. I was fiercely guarding the future of our daughter. Emily's security, emotional and financial, became my compass. It was no longer about salvaging a marriage that was already broken beyond repair, but about constructing a foundation strong enough to support the life she deserved. I could see the flicker of shock in Marcus's eyes, quickly masked by defensiveness and frustration. "Winnie, you're being unreasonable," he insisted, his voice tight. "We're family. We owe each other more than this." But I shook my head slowly. Family means accountability, Marcus. It means honoring commitments, not exploiting trust. If you can't meet these conditions, then it's best we keep our distance. The calm certainty in my voice was a far cry from the woman who had once swallowed her hurt silently, afraid to rock the boat. I had transformed, steeled by betrayal, and armed with the legacy my mother had entrusted to me. Every moment of doubt had been replaced by a clarity that demanded respect, not pity or empty reconciliation. This shift rippled through our interactions immediately. I stopped answering calls that weren't about Emily. Messages remained unread if they carried the old familiar tone of manipulation or blame. I established clear parameters. Discussions about Emily's education, health, and emotional welfare were open, but any drift into past grievances or attempts to control were firmly shut down. It was a delicate balance, protecting my daughter from the chaos while drawing a firm line with Marcus. For Emily, this new structure was both a relief and a challenge. She was caught between loyalty to her father and recognition of her mother's strength. I watched her carefully as she navigated her own feelings, offering quiet reassurance and open dialogue. I wanted her to know she was safe, that I was her steadfast protector, and that she deserved honesty and respect from both of us. Outside our immediate home, the family and community began to sense the change too. I noticed subtle shifts. Some relatives who had once dismissed my concerns now came to me with questions, seeking clarity about the estate and Marcus's behavior. Others remained entrenched in denial or bitterness, accusing me of tearing the family apart. Their words stung, but I had made peace with the fact that standing up for truth and justice would always ruffle feathers. In these moments, I clung to the memory and wisdom of my mother, Barbara, who had quietly safeguarded our legacy with foresight and love. The antique locket she gave me was more than a keepsake. It was a symbol of resilience and protection, a reminder that strength often comes wrapped in quiet perseverance. I touched it often, drawing courage from its weight. Professionally, I immersed myself deeper into my career, reclaiming parts of myself that had been sidelined for too long. I accepted new challenges and opportunities that allowed me to grow independently. It was a reclamation, not just of financial stability, but of identity and purpose. My work became a sanctuary, a place where my skills were recognized and valued. Socially, I leaned on close friends and trusted confidants who had supported me quietly through the years. Their presence was a balm to the wounds of betrayal, and their belief in me bolstered my resolve. I rediscovered the joy of genuine connection, free from pretense or obligation. Marcus, meanwhile, found himself increasingly isolated. His attempts to reconnect on his own terms were met with firm boundaries. The narrative he tried to spin about being the wronged party lost traction as people saw the facts and recognized the consequences of his own actions. The facade of control he once wielded crumbled under the quiet but undeniable force of truth. Throughout all this, I never lost sight of what mattered most: Emily's well-being and the legacy of integrity my parents had entrusted to me. I understood that respect and loyalty could not be demanded by blood alone. They had to be earned and protected with vigilance and courage. The legacy wasn't just financial, it was moral, emotional, and unbreakable. I walked forward with a steady heart, clear boundaries, and an unshakable commitment to build a life defined not by betrayal, but by dignity and strength. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, I felt in control, ready to face whatever came next on my own terms, for myself and for Emily.